Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for attending our second safety webinar. We held the first one 2 weeks ago, and now we've moved on to part 2, Managing Serious Injuries and Fatalities. This is part of AMPC's extension to our processes and hoping to be able to give you more information based on some of the feedback we got back from a stage 1 project that was completed by AMIC 2 years ago. So today we've got Andrew Douglas and Simon Booth, who's going to be there as a support role in case there's any workers' comp premium type questions. And Andrew is going to run through the webinar today. So we thank him very much for his time. For those that are new to using this webinar platform, all the participants and the attendees can hear the webinar. If you wish to ask a question, and we really encourage you to ask questions, on your toolbox, your table there, you should actually have a question bar. Type your questions in, and then we'll be able to forward them to the relevant person, and at the appropriate time, we'll hopefully be able to answer your question. If for some reason we can't answer the question on the webinar, we will endeavour to get back to you in a very timely fashion. So thank you, Andrew, and I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Amanda, and welcome everybody. I just want to know, I didn't bring Simon Booth as my support person because I'm in trouble. He's actually just there to support me. A couple of things, just starting with housekeeping. There is a table which I neglected to put in your workbook, which goes through every jurisdiction in Australia and New Zealand about what is a serious incident and what are the notification responsibilities to the safety regulator. So that's, Amanda will be sending that through to you shortly. Let's kick off now though and start the actual presentation. That's us, both in our younger days. That's very good. We should keep that up longer. So look, let's talk about first what a serious incident is. Can I start by saying this? When a serious incident happens in your workplace, it's no different than someone ringing up with a bomb scare. It's no different than there being a fire. It is a crisis that is occurring. Somebody has been seriously injured or killed in your workplace. Therefore, not to have a practiced process in place means two things. One, people will die or be more seriously injured. And secondly, you will be prosecuted. And that's not just the organisation, it's employees and officers of organisation. So what sits behind this entire presentation is a recognition by me, after doing this for 30 years and having managed with Graham over 500 serious injuries or fatalities, that the businesses who treat this as a crisis management process and practice it are prosecuted much less and much less seriously prosecuted when it does arise, and they do less damage to people. In every fatality that we've been involved in, a person within the operations division has developed a significant mental health issue that comes afterwards, and it was preventable. That's terrible, isn't it? Because when we look at the fatalities, Graham and I have probably done 100 fatalities. And that means there's 100 people wandering around with very profound mental health issues that prevent them from working, which you could have prevented. And that could be you. So please listen carefully to what I'm saying, because this is not just about protecting a business. It's about protecting people within the business when something terrible happens. And the only way to do that is develop a crisis policy with dedicated people who are committed to what they're doing and doing it properly. So the first thing to understand is, what is a serious incident? Well, a serious incident involves an injury as described in the legislation, that is the table that's coming out to you, that requires immediate medical assistance, a fatality or an incident that creates immediate risk to the health and safety of somebody. That could be shelving collapsing around a person. It could be any nature, it could be a wall collapse. They're the sorts of examples that form part of serious incidents. So the obligation, once you have one of those, is to notify the regulator as soon as practicable. Now that doesn't mean right away. It means as soon as practicable. What is a serious incident is a mixed question of both fact and law. So you can go to the table I've got at the back of this and you can say, look, there's been an amputation of the person's right finger. So as a matter of fact, that is a notifiable incident. But there is a lot you need to do before you notify the regulator. Now, it is an offence not to notify them as soon as practical. So leaving it 3 days, it's not going to wash. But there's things you need to do to look after the person who's been injured, the people who are around there, and to set up a legal professional privilege process to ensure that key information will not be shared with the regulator. You need to do that straight away. And you also need to shape what will be the notification, because obviously what you don't want to do is use words of the legislation and also of the triage process that sits inside the regulator, which triggers a high level response. All regulators have a triage. When you notify, it comes into around about 3 levels. We need to go out there straight away with a flying squad and we need to find out what's happening. 2, we do need to go out there, but it doesn't need to be straight away. 3, we probably don't need to go out there. We can do this over the phone. So if a person has their hand entrapped in a machine and it causes a degloving injury of their right arm, and they will need surgical intervention, please don't say that in the notification. What happened is the person got their hand caught in the machine. It's caused them an injury which requires immediate medical assessment. Now, the words I used in the latter part don't trigger any of the keywords that come up in the regulator's office, which causes the flying squad to land at your door and to shut your plant down, okay? So knowing how to notify is a skill as well, and that's why you need a bit of room to make the right decisions when these things happen. Because I'll tell you now, in the 500 plus cases we've been involved in, everybody was distressed, everybody was concerned, and nobody was well organised, despite the best practice, because of the very serious nature of what occurred. When somebody is seriously hurt or killed in your workplace, it will throw all good management out the window. And therefore you need people, unfortunately, like me, to come and steady the ship, get things right, make sure we're safe, make sure the person's being looked after, make sure their family is being looked after, make sure the workers are being looked after, preventing the risks of prosecution against you. You need that stuff. You need information that allows people to return to normality as quickly as possible so that their lives aren't damaged. Let's have a look at the next slide. All right, what we're going to talk about now is what is the process, okay? So there's been a serious incident, and let's just say we'll use our example of someone whose hand has been entrapped in an energized machine and it's caused massive injury to the person. The first rule is don't rescue them. That's the first rule. The first rule is make sure it's safe for you to rescue the person. In my experience, I've probably dealt with 15 to 20 secondary electrocutions or injuries that arise from a rescuer racing in to help somebody and causing more injury to the person who's been injured and being injured themselves. So make sure the plant is isolated. If there's electricity sparking and there's water on the floor, make sure the source of that electricity is turned off. Make sure before you go to help that person, you can help them and not get hurt and not hurt them. So the first rule is stop, make sure it's safe, then act, okay? Now that only takes 2 to 3 seconds, but it means you go home to your loved ones that night. That's a big difference, isn't it? And that's training, okay? That's not something I can say to somebody after the event. They can't ring me up and say, oh, Andrew, I've got a person with a hand entrapped in a machine. What do I do now? Because that's not going to be the way it happens. And that's why we must practice these things. Next thing is I attend the injured person, okay? At that time, I shout to get the first aider because I want somebody with skills around. My attendance is to provide support normally, wherever possible, to disengage the process that is hurting the person without the risk of creating more hurt. It is ensuring that the gawkers are sent away, the people who turn up to watch what's happening. So you immediately get security of the periphery of what's happening and say to people they must go back to work. Well, they must go somewhere and support them, but they mustn't stand and look at an injured person because they get in the road of the emergency services and it damages them. It hurts them, okay? So consider when people look at trauma, I want you to understand that is what is vicarious trauma. It injures them and it frustrates your capacity to help the person, okay? So this person needs privacy. Remember, this is a part of their life they can't control. In all our life, you know, there's a reason we have doors on toilets that say people can't see us peeing. That's the reason, because we want privacy. When someone is ill, what do they crave for? Privacy. When someone is hurting and injured and crying, and they're a 45-year-old man who's never cried all their life, and they're saying they're fearful of dying, do they want 40 of their workmates to actually hear that? I can absolutely assure you they don't. So part of a respectful work environment is ensuring that you don't let that sort of thing happen. You must also have somebody outside waiting for emergency services. And I want to say this very clearly. There have been too many occasions in my working life where people have not caused emergency services because they understand that when you call emergency services, that emergency service will immediately notify the regulator. Secondly, by calling emergency services, you trigger the second part of notification obligation, which is when someone requires immediate medical assistance, you must notify. And for some wrong-headed reason, people get caught up in that idea and they go, oh, let's not call emergency services. Well, let's not kill someone. Let's actually care for people who we're responsible for. What you do in the first few minutes after a serious incident may save a person's life or their capacity to move or live comfortably. So let's call emergency services wherever there is a risk and have somebody waiting outside to chaperone them immediately to where they are so they don't have to run around the business and try to get through. You need someone outside identifying the emergency services and bringing them directly to the person who needs it. Now, you have an obligation in safety law after a serious incident to preserve a site. In other words, you're not allowed to disturb the factors that led to this person's injury. Now, at some stage, because you want to get the plant going again, you're going to need the regulator approval for what occurred to actually release the site back into working operation. Now, this whole process that we're teaching you today has a number of different lateral themes. One is respecting and caring for the injured person and their family. The next one is respecting and caring for the friends and work colleagues of the injured person. The next one is avoiding prosecution wherever possible. The next one is bringing production back online as quickly as possible. None of those things are bad things, okay? Wanting to get the business going again is not a bad thing. It's not a cynical thing. We run businesses. When the line stops in an abattoir, the business is losing money by the second. Being prosecuted is not a good thing. It's not an honourable thing to be prosecuted. It's a thing that sends you to jail and costs you money. The most important thing always is the person who's injured and their family. Focus on that. You don't have to be prosecuted. You don't have to lose money. It's all part of the same game. So we are going to speak with a regulator after notification at a time when we can seek to have the site released and we can proceed to clean up and do what has to be done. That's a discussion you have with the regulator. And the person who is the appointed crisis manager, and I'll come and talk about that more in a second, will have that discussion with the regulator at the appropriate time. But there are things you can do to a site and disturb it without the approval of the regulator. And that's really straightforward. If I need to get safely to a person, I can clear anything out of my road to get to that person. I can break things. I can bend things. To make that person safe and to be able to make other people safe, I can disturb the site. That is not unlawful. I can make access for emergency services people. That is a lawful thing to do. But to do any other form of change to the site is unlawful and subject to serious fines. Is that clear? So, once the incident has occurred, please photograph the site post removal of the person and make notes on a piece of paper as to what changes occurred in the site as a result of protecting the individual and other workers and to make access for emergency people. That is a critical document that you must prepare. It's one which is discoverable to the regulator, and it's one that shows you're acting properly and will not be prosecuted for doing it. Does that make sense? Very simple thing to do. Let's try the next slide. All right. In your crisis management plan, and none of you will have it, I just want to keep belting you, please make one. You should appoint a crisis manager, and that crisis manager has some really key things about them. One, they are a very senior person in the business who does not have operational responsibility for the areas of risk. Now, why is that? Well, except for in Victoria, and and to a degree in South Australia and New Zealand, the person who accompanies and speaks to the regulator can be required to answer questions once the regulator says they are acting on their authority to make inquiries. So the last person you want accompanying the regulator is a person who knows the history of the plant and that risk area, isn't it? So the one person you definitely don't want there is the safety manager or the HR manager, because they know where all the dead are buried. They know all the problems that have occurred. They must not be there talking to the regulator. The other person you don't want is the supervisor. Now, there's two reasons. The supervisor will say, hopefully not, but commonly in an email afterwards, I always knew this was going to happen. It nearly happened to John 2 weeks ago. That's just per se liability. That's prosecution. You're definitely going to get it. So we want someone senior in the business who is a leader in the business, who doesn't have key operational knowledge, but understands exactly what needs to be done and will support the regulator's inspector or enforcement team when they arrive. And will take them to the site and be generous and good to them. Now remember, it is an offence to hinder or obstruct the regulator, but you're not required to spoon feed them the evidence they need for prosecution. Not at all. Nor are you obliged to put in front of them somebody who's highly skilled and can give them that information in the first half an hour of the regulator being there. Now, regulators are like you and I. Their days are busy. They only have a 2 or 3 day window to investigate any serious injury or fatality. That's just the truth of it. So if they're not getting that evidence in the first hours, they're not able to understand their prosecution narrative, and therefore they're not able to identify the evidence they need. So don't put people around them who can give them that in the first 10 minutes. It's crazy. In any crisis, you need a senior operational leader to manage the business, okay? Because everyone's blowing it, everyone's distracted. Everyone's standing outside with cigarettes going, I knew him, I hope he's alive. They're all talking about different questions. So you need someone who is calm, coherent, knows what needs to be done, knows the process, and gives people comfort. There is a form of leadership in crisis, which is known. There's 4 basic types of leadership that are required. But the general leadership, as in general in the army type leadership, is during a period of crisis, you give clear directions, you don't consult. So you don't say, hey, Julia, is that okay? You go, Julia, go and do this, because people need clear direction. And the only way they'll do that is to have somebody very senior in the business doing it. Once the notification process becomes clear, this looks like a serious injury, fact, remember 2 questions, fact, law, then the crisis managers should engage a safety lawyer, not a commercial lawyer. Most lawyers know nothing about safety law, and they are a nuisance and get in your road and create risk. It must be a safety lawyer. It doesn't have to be me, it just has to be someone who genuinely knows how to do this, okay? They appoint them under legal professional privilege. Now, the benefit of legal professional privilege is it is a cloak that prevents the regulator from seeing the communications that occur with that advisor. And that means every discussion we have around risk, every discussion about intervention, every discussion about will we notify, will we not notify, every part of the investigation we undertake, the regulator can't see. Because remember, what's the point of doing an investigation that the regulator can see that says you're liable? And you're not allowed to make up investigations that say you're not. So I need the deepest investigation, but I need it under privilege so that I can actually make changes so nobody gets hurt again. And so the business is safe. If it's not under legal professional privilege, the regulator will claim it. So it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? So you appoint the lawyer looks, crafts your notification, says, yes, you must notify, but before they do that, they're going to engage an independent safety expert to come to your site and beat the regulator there wherever possible. And if not, to guide through your safety person before the regulator gets there, to lock out and tag any other risk that's around there, to understand clearly what is the probable cause, to support the supervisor and management as to what actions they need to take, and to start an investigation, all under privilege. Why do I not want you investigating? And there are some law firms who very foolishly say, you're the OHS guy, you do the investigation under privilege. Well, that is a deeply stupid thing to do, okay? Because your role as an OHS person means you have an obligation to provide risk-based advice to the organisation. And the test of what is legal professional privilege is the dominant purpose for undertaking the investigation is under legal privilege, but the dominant role of a safety person is to provide safety to the business. So they're never going to be covered properly by legal professional privilege when they do an investigation. They shouldn't be there doing it. It should be somebody outside. Now, in an abattoir, you're going to do two full skin thickness cuts a week, maybe one. And that's a notifiable incident, but you're not going to call in a lawyer for that because you're not going to be prosecuted for it because it's an inherent risk in what the business is. But you get someone's hand caught in a machine or an amputation. You get a significant fall from a height where there's unconsciousness. You get a traffic accident where someone's run over by a forklift. They're notifiable and the regulator will be there, make a beeline to be there, must be under privilege. Okay, so I've said who the crisis manager is. They're a project manager, they're highly skilled. As a leader in the business, they're respected by the business. That means when they give orders, people do what they're told to do. And they will be the primary contact with the regulator going forward to build that relationship, because after this is all over, there are a lot of chances before the brief is delivered by the investigator or enforcement part of safety to actually the legal team in the safety regulator. It's the relationship that exists with the regulator at that time that can prevent prosecution, but that can only happen where a relationship of trust has been built up. Regulators, like police, commonly are very kind to people because they hope by being kind to someone like a safety person, they'll hand over the whole box and dice. Now that's not a good relationship. That goes only one way, that goes to jail. But for a more senior reserve person who can assist them, support them, but have that level of distance, you'll find a relationship does build because the regulator starts to understand they can't pull one over them. But equally, where they can assist, the crisis manager will support the regulator. That is a good relationship because it's two-way and allows sensible settlement discussions to occur prior to the handing over the brief to the legal department. Because remember, when it goes to the legal department of WorkSafe, it's an entirely different group of people who deal with it. Their focus is on prosecution. That's what they do for a living. They prosecute. And from there, it often goes to Director of Public Prosecutions or the APP, for instance, in Victoria, who are another entirely different business again. So where there's an opportunity to resolve early, we do that. Okay. Each time it goes to someone different, there is a new opportunity, but the mechanism of resolution is different. When it goes to the ultimate prosecuting person, then we're arguing questions of law, and we've already excluded so much fact that they're finding the case hard to run. And they don't want to lose because there's a cost ramification for them as well. And there's embarrassment because they are a name and shame organisation. The idea of running prosecutions is not to punish people per se, but to say to the community, unless you act safely, you're going to be prosecuted. So the last thing they want to do is lose. So at each level of elevation, we have an opportunity. At the first level, the relationship with the crisis manager and the regulator is key. Next one. All right. So the safety expert has been appointed. They turn up, they'll do a quick triage and go, yeah, I can see what it is. Probable reason for this is, here is the policy that says how you manage this machine. The cutout has been fixed by maintenance in a way that allows you to get to the machine when it's still operating. That's a terrible problem. It shouldn't have occurred. Okay, I can see the line of causation that's here, and that allows me as the lawyer to say, all right, we really have quite a substantial problem. Let's actually work at what facts the regulator will ask for, and let's make sure the other facts they're not going to hear about. So let's do a couple of things. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you is this. When the safety guy turns up and he tells me there's risk, I'm going to say, make sure you get all the affected guys off-site so that we can talk to them, we can get them trauma counselling, and we can provide them with notes which we've pre-prepared and had ready as part of our crisis management process that says how we can help and support them. And they don't need to be back that day. They're welcome to come back tomorrow, and we ring them around about 6 o'clock at night, see how they are, that sort of stuff, okay? I'm going to take away witnesses. They're going to be gone. Now, why am I doing that? Actually, I don't want the regulator asking questions which re-traumatise people in the immediate aftermath because we know that causes psychological damage. I do want you to have skilled trauma counsellors that you vetted before an incident, because they know the two methodologies that you use to manage people who've seen trauma, which don't say, tell me exactly what you saw. Because when a person relives trauma, they re-hurt trauma. And there are varying degrees of post-traumatic response up to post-traumatic stress disorder. The key in counselling and managing people is not to drag them over the coals 27 times about the same set of facts. So we take people outside, we let them be together. What we found out, and I was involved in the Port Arthur process, was where we got people who shared something jointly together, being good to each other, being kind to each other, showing that camaraderie, that was very curative. Where we got people involved, asked them, so what happened? We found lots of damage done, okay? So you need a bit of help around when you take people away. You say to people, look, we're not going to talk about what just happened in detail, but more look towards looking after each other and what we're going to do tomorrow and what we're going to do the next day. So we teach people already what the risks are of re-traumatizing people as they're moved away. For the regulator, we'll give them phone numbers, we'll give them addresses, we'll say the people will be back tomorrow. That's just another barrier for the regulator who's already busy. But for our people, we've protected them. We've done the right thing. So this isn't a cynical enterprise. It happens to have a very good outcome for us. It takes away the source of immediate ownership of blame. And that's what people want to do. When someone is injured, they want to say it's their fault. They want to say, oh, look, this has nearly happened 8 times before. Give someone 12 hours and they start going, well, maybe if I say a lot, I'll start implicating myself and maybe I'll get prosecuted. That's very likely, isn't it? So people need to know what are their risks, which is what we say to people when we collect them together outside of the working environment, a safe place, and say, many of you will be thinking, you could have stopped this. Well, just remember, your obligations in relation to speaking to the regulator are A, B, C, and D. You're not obliged to do stuff which causes a risk to yourself. You're only obliged to say what you know, not what you think, not conjecture. So don't say things you think. Don't offer opinions, because that may be the key that's thrown away when you go to jail. Be straight with people, tell them the truth, okay? Safety person comes in, identifies, tells me that we can take that initial intervention. I can talk to the supervisor and management group, explain to them clearly what the law is and say, these are the things you can say, these are the things you don't say. Got it, okay. The safety person will make sure the site is safe and free from risks of prosecution. What regulators always do is they come in and they give you improvement notices and prohibition notices. Improvement notices give you a period of time to remedy something. Prohibition notices require you to stop what you're doing until such time as they allow you to start it again, and you've got to satisfy them that it's safe. Now, what the regulator will do is write notices which prescribe a higher remedy than what is required at law. And you can't blame them. Their job is to make the place safe. But if we take away things they can write notices for, so we see a forklift that doesn't have a seatbelt, so we take it out, block it out. We can go in and install a seatbelt in 3 minutes. After the regulator is gone, we can use that forklift straight away. It's good, isn't it? We can start production immediately because we don't have to get the approval of the regulator to start again. So that's what the safety expert does. They cleanse the area of risk. And I can assure you, when you end up in trial or in a plea in mitigation, the fact that you've got 6 incident reports and a prohibition notice is incredibly aggravating to the ultimate award of the ultimate prosecution penalty that you get. So we don't want those. We want the business to be free to respond the moment the regulator is left and to fix what needs to be fixed and to go on with their production. But if you don't get that done, you'll be out for days. So my safety experts, the ones I use, always do that, okay? They'll help you with the incident report. They're skilled if they use the people that I use in what you should say and what you shouldn't say, and they'll help explain the process to everybody and give them immediate comfort. And they'll be physically present. You don't need a lawyer on your workplace, okay? There's lots of lawyers who turn up with the junior lawyers in suits. That's when you're definitely going to be prosecuted, because the regulator knows at that stage you definitely got something to hide, and lawyers are a bloody nuisance on site. And the workers think you've brought in the mercenaries to defend you, not them. Don't have lawyers on site, okay? It's a really bad and it's a dumb idea and it gets in your road. You must be in control of your own site. You must be communicating yourself with the regulator, not through lawyers. They shouldn't know lawyers exist in this. You'll get a letter at some stage requiring you to participate in an interview, and that tells you that you're about to be prosecuted, or you'll get a section 155 in the WHS states which says you have to answer questions on oath. That's telling you you're going to be prosecuted. At that stage, the lawyer jumps in and the regulator goes, oh, no, that's good. I understand. That's when you'd be there. But I don't want them to know the lawyers are involved. I want them to think you're in control. How disconcerting is it for them when you seem to be running the place brilliantly and there's no lawyers around? And what it shows is you're good people in control of your workplace who are worried about the person who's been injured. Now, that's the type of thing that prevents prosecution. Does that make sense? Having a safety expert in the background, they don't talk to the regulator. They don't have a comment. That's nothing to do with the regulator. You don't say, oh, hi, this is Julia, the safety expert, because our safety expert is entirely separate. All we want the safety expert to do is do their job as I've described it. And if they can see what the regulator is doing, or they can get information about what the regulator is doing, they're able to tell us in a very simple way what the regulator's state of mind is. And we keep following the regulator's state of mind through a prosecutorial process to understand what are our risks for us, okay? So that's our safety expert. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so we're now about to notify. So what have we done? We've preserved the site. We've looked after the person who's been injured. We've determined there is risk. We've appointed a safety person to go and understand what that risk is to report under privilege. The legal advice says now we have to go ahead and notify. Good. I've told you how I want you to notify, which is no conclusions or opinions. This was an unsafe place. This was an inherently dangerous operation. Why would you say that? Just say what the facts are. No opinions, no conclusions. Okay? The person was knocked unconscious, suffered a head injury. Yeah, you're not a doctor. Yeah, they've been knocked out. Okay, they've been knocked out. That's what happened. They seem to lose consciousness. That's okay, but not they got a head injury. You don't know that. Stop writing stuff which is not in your area of expertise, just talking facts, and avoid key words that are used in safety and in the description of injuries that trigger you going up the triage process at the regulator. Okay, next one. Good. Okay, our next step is we're notifying the regulator. We've done that. We now know that there is a real need to have a communications process. In any crisis, it is the lack of communication that causes chaos. So we've got our general, okay, giving directions. That general needs to know who are the stakeholders. I can tell you now it's a bit late to be analysing that once the injury's happened. I'll tell you who the stakeholders are. They're the injured person's family, their co-workers, their suppliers and customers, they're your board, they're your owners, and they're the regulator. And they may be the media as well, okay? In a serious fatality, you must have an expert crisis communicator. That's not your marketing division. They know nothing about crisis. There's about a handful of people across Australia who are skilled crisis communicators, just excuse me. They're the only ones who understand that the use of the word no comment is incredibly stupid. Anyone who wants to check this out should look at the Beaconsfield gold fiasco that got Bill Shorten elevated to Prime Minister. Nearly, not quite. He nearly got there, okay? He did it because Beaconsfield Mine said no comment when they killed a whole lot of people and lost a few others. Dumb thing to say. Who's your primary stakeholder? Your employees. You must speak to your employees. Had Beaconsfield Gold said, we don't understand what has occurred, we're investigating it. We are incredibly distressed by the loss that has been incurred and the risk that is there. We are constantly working with the family, and we will come back to our employees as we find information, and we'll improve safety and keep them involved. And we want you, the public, to understand our commitment is first to our employees. Now, that's good communication, isn't it? There's no story in that. There's no terrible Beaconsfield gold mine. But Bill Shorten ran that story. He was the head of the union. He ended up running the conference every single day. And what did he talk about? The plight of the employees and their family. Whose conversation should have that been? So can I say to you, if you have a fatality, talk to Simon or to me or to somebody you trust, but get a crisis communicator, not an advertising group, not some tin pot marketing business. There are a handful, and I mean no more than a handful, of key crisis communicators who will look to protect you externally in the media. Okay, so let's talk about them in order. The individual, if the person is injured, we always have someone stay with that individual when they go to hospital. Okay, if it is a fatality, you will still have someone who travels, who speaks immediately to the family. In a fatality, you must wait for the police to notify. Can I just say that? A coroner will be appointed and they will speak to the affected family, but you must ensure that you get a communication as soon as you're aware of that so that you connect to the family. And for all family in serious incidents or fatalities, you must get their consent to disclose the impact upon family and the individual and what is occurring and what is needed so that you can go back to work colleagues and communicate to them accurately what is occurring. Otherwise, scuttlebutt will happen. Otherwise, you'll get third parties like unions coming in and communicating what they think. These are your people. Okay, you must have a card that you prepare as part of your crisis management, which is for family that says, we'll provide free travel, free accommodation. It says what you're going to do. This is the person you can contact in the need of emergency. It goes through the things that people need to know because the family need to know you're there and you need an accurate source of information back to stop lies occurring on the floor, to stop people becoming distracted and gossiping. The immediately affected staff, you need to be talking to them at the beginning of every shift because these are friends and say to them, look, John's still in intensive care. He's off the ventilator. Prognosis apparently is really good. The family have said, please don't contact them. There are 2 people who are close to the family who I've said, please do. But for the remainder of you, can you avoid using social media and sending messages to the family? They're in a heightened state of distress at the moment and they want their privacy. Don't you want to be that person saying those things? Don't you want to be telling the truth to your employees every day? The news of this will spread across your workforce at enormous speed, so make sure there is a proper communication throughout the business, even in different states, sometimes even overseas on the size of the business. No one has ever been prosecuted for putting out a safety alert afterwards. So the safety alert doesn't say Johnny was entrapped in a machine and suffered a gloving injury as a result of the negligence of the business, because you would be prosecuted for that. That's done. But it might be that you put out an alert that says, in respect of a specific machine that's used throughout Australia, look, we've had an injury on site relating to this machine. We want people to go back and we want them to undertake immediately a risk assessment of that machine and to alter any safe operating procedure that you have in place to ensure the machine is safe. And we'll support you from head office in that respect. And the last part of that will always say, the fact that we've had an injury in our business is a terrible thing. We're caring for that person at the moment and providing their support, and we'd ask for your support as well, and to be mindful that someone has been hurt in this business, and that's something we strive never to happen. Okay, so once again, we've maintained what is our narrative, which is around caring for our people, and that is the primary narrative. It never shifts. Okay, we would keep the immediate crew going for a couple of weeks, and then less and less based on change. But we'd tell them and we'd get them to agree what that communication would look like. For the rest of the business, it would be less frequent and based on change. Suppliers and customers are critical because if we close the line down, we're not going to get the Coles order out tonight. Not going to happen. So we need to tell them the truth that they need to hear, which is, look, I'm sorry, we've got an order due, you're due to pick up in an hour and a half's time. It's going to be 3 to 4 hours, I think. We've just letting you know we've had an incident. One of our staff has got hurt. Our focus is completely on our staff at the moment. Investigation is being undertaken, of course. The line will be operating on two parts of the business, but not the area of injury, which is the boning room on line 4. Be truthful with them. What comes out of that is both suppliers and customers invariably say thank you. Okay, they always do, they say thanks. But if they read it in the newspaper and you miss your delivery or you don't do something, they don't say thanks at all. In fact, they judge you, that you're trying to hide stuff. And remember, under some of these contracts, an injury can actually be a term that can lead to termination of that contract. like Coles contracts, for instance, or Woolworths contracts. Natures of serious incidents are events which can be notifiable under those contracts and lead to the loss of the contract. So don't get caught up and say, I'm not going to tell them, because they are going to find out, and that's when they're going to be angry. Whereas if you engage them, explain what's happening and what you're doing, they're fine. All right, so let's try the next slide. So our communication is up and running. This is what's happened to the family. We've talked to them immediately. We've given them a person who's skilled. Now, it may not be the crisis manager. It may be, so for instance, I could be a good crisis manager in our business, but I'd be a shocking person to use to be close and to care for people, because that ain't my skill, okay? I've been a litigator for 30 years. I'm very good at making decisions. I'm not the warmest soul you'll ever meet, okay? So make sure you've got people who you can rely on to actually engage in a way which is helpful, who's got an armful of very easy to read and understand information, and gets the family's consent to provide that information, and make sure that they are supported, that they're in hotels, that their travel has been arranged, all the things that need to happen, that kids are being picked up from school if that's what's necessary. All those things, because these people don't know what to do. They've got less idea than you, because the person they love has been broken. So you must give them certainty during this time, and you must give them somebody who gives them that comfort and compassion. Please don't ever use that word empathy for me. It is such a boring word. It's such a meaningless, trite, rubbishy word. I want compassion. These people are hurt. They are connected to one of our employees who we care about. I want compassion. I want connection. I want them to know that you care and that you're batting for them. That's what I want to know. And that every bit of information they need, they're got. And I want a 24-hour contact number that they can ring when they're worried. It's not a lot to ask. You've just hurt someone, their loved one. It's not a lot to ask, okay? Pretty easy, isn't it? Family, easy, but terribly important. Most prosecutions arise for marginal cases where the family become disaffected with the business and become angry. There are always, if we move to the next slide, a disaffected and difficult person who is actually inside your business, who gossips and becomes the back door to the regulator. Just remember, the regulator is allowed to bring the HSR with them on the inspection. Under all legislation, they're entitled to attend. In some businesses, the HSR is a highly industrialised person. So the reason we communicate with everybody is that person has no better or worse information than anyone else. What they do have is, from you, the very best information. They can't get better information from their union. They can't get better information from the regulator. They've got the best information from you. So they can't gossip, because other people will say, hey, don't be saying that stuff. You know what the business is doing. They've got them in hotels. They're flying them in. Why are you saying this stuff? You're not going to be able to stop this detractor from trying to hurt you. But if you don't have the communication right, they'll make it up and they'll get other people involved. And then a third party like a union will come in and say, this is not a safe working environment. You don't want that. As far as the regulator goes, their relationship is with the crisis manager, okay? So we've now got the regulator, they've attended site. We started all our communication, everything's going well. We've got our safety person, it's all locked out, tag out. The regulator turns up at the door. We greet the regulator with open arms, say, look, let's take you directly to where you are. We've set up a room. Jean here is a phone number. She is the CEO's PA. She'll give you access to a photocopier or phones or whatever you need. But let's take you directly to this. Is there anything that you would like from us? Now, the person who's going to do that's the crisis manager. And the regulator is going to say, oh, can you tell us what happened? And the crisis manager is going to say, look, sorry, my role is actually in the coordination of this process. I understand the guy called Fred Bear got his hand stuck in a machine. He's gone off to hospital now. It looked like he had an injury to his hand. But look, come and take it to the site. That's about all I know at the moment. Let's come and take it to the site and we'll do whatever you need to support around you. He'll get to the site. Now, they will always talk to as many people as they can to try and build up a picture of what occurred. Okay? So don't have those people hanging around with you. Just don't have it. Don't have it. Okay? They'll ask for CCTV. They'll ask for all the documents and policies and procedures. And they'll ask to speak to relevant witnesses. And you'll say, yeah, sure, look, we've got people off-site at the moment. Some are receiving trauma counselling, they're going home. We've got a list, Jean's got the list of people we'd ask you to be respectful of those people today. They're pretty traumatised by what does matter for you. Okay, we've done the right thing. Yeah. They'll get a bit of a picture, but they find out nearly everything in the first 2 hours because people talk to them. And people are so filled with guilt, they blurt out things. And they'd say everything, things they would never say if they had a moment to reflect. So when the crisis manager draws the regulator in and there's no one there but the crisis manager, and he says, so what happened? And we go, look, we're not sure what happened. All we know is we found his hand got stuck there. That's what we know. And I'll go, so is there CCTV? And I said, yeah, look, I'm organising a copy for you now. It's often bad. The CCTV is terrible. Don't try and hide that you've got CCTV. They'll ask for it. Don't delay it so it gets wiped off, because that's a criminal offence under every Crimes Act to destroy evidence which is discoverable in a proceeding. That's a go to jail crime. Don't do that. Okay. So please don't use OHS managers. Please, the OHS manager, disappear as quickly as you can and get off site somewhere. Go and do a course like this online. Do anything. Just bugger off. Just don't be around. The operations manager, you be scarce as well. You've got other job around the business to do. Please don't put knowledgeable people in front of this guy or woman who turns up. You're not to hinder or obstruct. What I'm talking about is not hindering and obstructing. It's just not providing evidence freely. Okay. You cannot do things like hide evidence. You cannot prevent them from seeing things that are important. You can't prevent them from seeing. You can't refuse to give names. You can't do any of that stuff. Now, in Victoria and in South Australia and in New Zealand, a person does not have to disclose personally anything because they have a right to protect themselves. There's an actually pure right of silence in Victoria. They can just give you name or address. Elsewhere, you can provide it, but it's under a disclosure process where you say, I'm fearful of saying anything in case I incriminate myself. So there's ways around that. We can talk you through that at each site as to what it means. Okay, but very important people know it, isn't it? Because in Victoria, I would say to every single supervisor, you have a right not to speak to them other than to give them name and address. And if you think you've got anything helpful to say about your observations, have a think about what your capacity was to change that before you talk, because otherwise it could be you. Okay. Now, I'm not allowed to persuade people not to talk, but I'm allowed to tell them what the law is. Okay. So the regulator will be there for a day, 3 or 4 hours in a day. They will certainly come back within a day again, and they will definitely come back a month later. If they put improvement notices, they'll come back before then. You'll obviously be wanting those improvement notices lifted. Please don't seek extensions for the compliance with improvement notices or prohibition notices. If what is being requested is not lawful, object to them. Okay, appeal them. You appeal them internally first, and then to a particular authority. In Victoria would be VCAT, but there's different tribunals that deal with it, because accepting of an improvement notice is an admission of a wrong. Okay, it's an admission of a wrong. It's a relevant antecedent when you enter a plea of mitigation. It means you agree that what you did was wrong. And remember, they'll cast their eyes all around the business to find as many of those as they can to build their case. So let's go on to the next slide. Gee, that was quick. The next slide is last. Is that really? Did we just come back? All right, very good. So I've not done too bad. We've got 11 minutes left. Can I just talk to you very quickly before I start answering any questions? This all happens in the first 2 days. The regulators simply can't hang around after the first 2 days, okay? Can't hang around. They're too busy. So what they don't get in the first 2 days is usually they don't get the true narrative of what occurred. Now, the really nasty narrative is always this, that this was something that was known as a risk or ought to have been known as a risk. This was an issue which arose because of a failure by the organisation to apply or enforce policies or procedures, or it goes to a failure in the design process deeper down that you were responsible for. Please tell people as part of training to not send emails saying things like, John nearly had this happen to him 2 weeks ago. I knew this was going. Okay. Now, when we set up legal professional privilege, we set up a legal professional privilege protocol. That might be Julia, who's to my right, Terry, the dog, who's to my far right. There might be 4 or 5 of us in that protocol. They're all the people who need to make decisions. Nobody else is allowed any of this information. Those people can communicate freely through me, and none of that communication can be revealed. But everyone else's communication can be required under the direction of the Act in place and by a court. So you can't hide it. So when people say things like, I knew this was going to happen, if that's discovered, that's a basis for prosecution. So when we put in legal professional privilege, we always put a protocol and identify who's going to talk to me and who's going to make decisions, nobody else. When we get the report that comes in from the expert, it goes into that funnel. How do I make changes on the workplace? I take the knowledge of that report, I go out, and I'm with my safety person. We influence people as they undertake risk assessments on that, the type of machinery or process, and they discover how to improve it. We haven't waived privilege. Now, waiving privilege means if Julie is not in my group, but I send her an email about the investigator's report, I've waived the protection of legal professional privilege, and therefore the regulator is allowed access to it. So we must keep communication light inside the group of people who are responsible and say to other people, we'll talk to you about risk assessment. What we don't want you to do is sending emails and texts and stuff on social media which places the organisation at risk. Now, I think I've got a question up here, which is what if the regulator wants to interview the injured worker's supervisor who was at the room at the time of the incident? Can the safety expert speak on their behalf? No, the safety expert never ever speaks to the regulator. They're entirely separate. We don't want them talking because we waive privilege in that process. So they might be introduced if they happen to bump into each other, and it might be, say, it's Matt Salter, who I use a lot, or Gary Rowe, or one of the guys that I use who are fantastic safety consultants. Regulators say, oh, Gary, because they'll know Gary and Matt. Go, yeah, why are you here? And they'll say, I've been engaged by Andrew Douglas to look at what's happening. Look, I've got to go, see you later. Now, we'll get a letter saying they want Gary Rowe's report, and we'll just tell them to get nicked. Okay, so safety expert, no. Yes, they're entitled to speak to the supervisor. All we're going to do is give the supervisor a bit of breathing space, and I want to have a chance to speak to all those leaders in the organisation who are at risk and explain to them before they speak to the regulator what is the law around the compellability of their evidence and what are the risks for them of giving evidence. So it may be you're in New South Wales where the supervisor must speak to the regulator. Okay, must speak to the regulator. So the first question when the regulator says, can I speak to the supervisor? If I'm the supervisor, is you just ask, look, are you exercising your authority under legislation? Yes. And what the person says, okay, this is pretty serious, isn't it? I'd really like to get some advice before I have a chat to you. Okay. So that's what I'd like to do. But yes, they're always able to ask, and the inspector can go, no, look, I do want to chat to you right now. Can you tell me exactly what happened? And all the supervisor says is, look, I came upon the scene at which stage I saw this. Remember, you don't have to say everything. You just got to tell the truth. Does that make sense? You just got to tell the truth. Now, the truth is this big, or it's that big. I want this big. Okay. I'd never want you to tell a lie, but I don't want you to tell everything. Okay. So does that make sense? Now, can I appeal the prosecution handed down by the regulator? What if the regulator wants to interview? So that's, can I appeal? So the answer is yes, I can. So let's do that in a couple of steps. Let's start at the stage, is it a notice? I can appeal that internally and then eventually to an external part. If an organisation launches a prosecution against you, you can't appeal that process until it's played out in court. So you can only appeal afterwards. And the difficulty is that the actual decision makers in a prosecution really only play a positive part in the last 2 to 3 weeks, because that's when the clever people get involved who are going to be involved in the trial or plea. So you have these sort of 2 or 3 opportunities. One is prior to the brief going to the legal people. If you've got a relationship where your lawyers have relationships with the legal people, prior to them making a determination to launch a prosecution, you have an opportunity to have a chat. I reckon about 1 of 10 cases I had that conversation, but you must never ever give away your defence because they'll just amend the prosecution to meet that. Does that make sense? So never do that. It's a very coy process, I understand that. Next it goes to actually the barristers who are going to appeal, and at that stage, as long as you've locked the evidence down so they can't change their case, at that stage you may disclose your defence or the failing in their case, and they may walk away. And in the last, if I use the last 10 cases I've been involved in, one of them didn't proceed because the regulator, the enforcement officer, agreed with us prior to going to lawyers, and it never went any further. We've had 3 what are called nollie prosecues or withdrawals of complaint, which all happened the last 2 or 3 weeks when barristers were involved. We locked all the evidence down without telling anybody what our case was, and then we explained the case immediately before trial, and they walked away. The rest of them have all gone ahead, one to trial, the rest in pleas and guilty. So you can only appeal the prosecution once the process is played out. So sorry, that was a long answer, Ken. I'm sorry about that. Next question. What happens if they request to speak to a witness who is nervous and is not familiar? Okay, so remember, these are your people, Terry. So the most important thing to say to people is, look, you may be requested. You're entitled to have somebody to be with you. They are only as a support, not as a representative. Be really clear about that. Don't stick a lawyer next to them, and don't stick somebody who is important in the business next to them. Please just don't do that. What you do is say to them, this is what they're likely to ask you. Answer honestly. Be aware of your own risks about your own involvement. And what you don't know, don't say. So don't offer opinions, don't offer conclusions. We'll provide you with support before and after. And we're happy to have someone sit with you to feel safe when you're doing it. You can't be wrong in what you do. You just tell the truth, but your job is not to offer opinions or make conclusions. It's merely to answer facts. And if they ask you for opinions, just say, look, I don't have an opinion. Okay? Next question. So their question is no for a crisis manager that is OHS and HR manager, operations manager also is a no. So external person for a crisis manager rather than an MD or CEO. Look, I'm okay with a senior operations person, okay? In fact, they're the ideal people. They're a step back, they do have knowledge of the floor, but they're being people usually have been in the business for 15 or 20 years, they actually get it, they're rough and tough people, and they will step back and they won't collect evidence before the regulator comes through the door, and that's the real trick, that they're clean of evidence before the regulator comes to the door. They simply know the person suffered this type of injury as a result. That's all they know. Don't use someone external. It just complicates matter. It's good to use external communications expert, but you're absolutely right. I don't want the MD or the CEO involved. So that's a really great pickup, but never, ever, 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 ever the safety guy. Never, ever the supervisor. That's fatal, okay? In your opinion, what is better, an enforceable undertaking or a prosecution? I'm pretty anti-enforceable undertakings. It might be different, for instance, where somebody gets an infection from an animal. We've had those types of things before where it's a one-off and where it's fixable. But an enforceable undertaking has 3 elements which are pretty ugly. 1, you'll pay a lot more to get it, okay, a lot more. 2, when you offer an enforceable undertaking, it doesn't have to be accepted by the regulator and then by the judge. So you might get through the regulator, but you don't get through the judge. So it's not flash. 3, the undertaking is always higher than the legal obligation that you're required to meet. And that means it's very easy to breach. And if it's a repeated breachable thing, so say it's forklift use, you never give an undertaking because you're going to knock someone down with a forklift again. But when you give an undertaking, it's the officer who gives that undertaking. And what you've done is just expose the officer to imprisonment because it's going to happen again. It's a bit like giving an enforceable undertaking for a cut injury. You never do it at an abattoir because you're going to cut people. You're never going to do it for traffic-related incidents because you're going to do it again. So enforceable undertakings are nice for things like Q fever, okay, where you can actually do the testing properly, you can set up a regime, it'll never happen again. But it is a terrible idea for a repeatable type of thing which you can't stop. So I'm not good on it. What I like doing is going low with a plea, not getting a conviction if it's a first type offence, so there's no great exposure. And the level of risk works downwards like this. If I can reduce something down to a not safe working environment, that's the lowest type of charge you can get. I'm going to get a really low fine, no conviction probably. But if I let it slip up to lack of training or lack of supervision, or worse still, lack of system, and lack of system and supervision, I've exposed the officers of the organisation. So what we're really trying to do is get it down to unsafe working environment once off. If it's between, enforceable undertakings are not my idea, and they're hugely expensive. They don't provide you certainty and they create more risk. And if it's a very serious charge, you'll never get one in any event. Next question. Okay, what's the success in getting them? They are of a very limited scope. They're for non-fatality based issues. They're for things which are precious to the regulator at the time, and they're things which require you to publicly disclose your failure and to damage your reputation. At the moment, in the last 12 months, we've done 2 enforceable undertakings where they were the right decision to make, and in one of those, the regulators just refused it again. So, but yeah, look, you can get them if it's the trend for them, and if they want them, they'll give them to you. But you'll pay 3 to 4 times the price for enforceable undertaking than you will for a solicitor and barrister to enter a plea if you're guilty. Okay, so that's my idea. Now, I think we've sort of reached the end of our time by about 2 minutes, guys. I hope that's been helpful, and thank you very much for your time. I'm going to sign off at this stage. I've got to run. So see you later. Bye-bye.
On behalf of AMPC, thank you, Andrew, for giving us your valuable insights today and giving people some really good tools to put in their toolkit. We hope that people don't need to use them, but at least that they've got the knowledge and some systems in place if in the unfortunate situation they do need to use them. So if anyone's got any other questions or anything like that, feel free to email them through to myself at acarter@ampc.com.au and I can get you in touch with Andrew or Simon. And just as we finish off this webinar now, there is a survey. Would love for you to be able to complete that survey to be able to give us feedback moving forward. And then hopefully we will see you all at our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time, which is the 3rd stage of this safety session on the webinars. Thank you very much for your time.